You are watching the most OP Shatterpoint updates. I am Omnis, and I'm here with the most suave Aman Khusro. Thank you for recording with me, man.
Hello there. I'm good. I'm very happy to be here, and it's my pleasure, honestly. So thank you for inviting me.
I'm glad you got a little hello there action in there. I feel like if you didn't say that, it wouldn't even really be recording with you.
That's true. There's a brand that we kind of have to, promote. So
I did recently watch some of the early Clone Wars episodes, kind of doing a rewatch, and I had totally forgotten that when Obi-Wan first meets Grievous, Grievous says hello there.
that's true, and yeah, it's. I think it's almost like a running joke between them at this point.
I think it actually makes Revenge of the Sith better because it's Obi-Wan sassing him. Like, I
Yes,
remember our first encounter, and I'm sassing you because I'm ready for this.
I think people underestimate the amount of sass Obi-Wan provides.
I think that's why we love him, though, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's such a sassy guy. I love it.
Yeah. Funny, we're not even a hello there episode, yet we still have to sneak in just a little bit of lore. Just,
Always.
yeah,
It's
love it.
what binds us.
Binds the universe together. Well, so listeners, watchers, the topic here is actually inspired by something not Shatterpoint. I was recently reading about how the Age of Sigmar worlds. And now, keep in mind, I don't play Games Workshop stuff. I am a tourist in that discussion. You are way more the Games Workshop guy than I am. And so, listeners, if you do play Age of Sigmar and I miscommunicate any of this, I am very sorry. I'm absorbing information very third hand. But the gist that I got was that they do not want to use chess clocks at the World Championship or whatever they call it for Age of Sigmar. And they came out with some very elaborate rules for how they're going to handle time, despite a lot of qualifiers using chess clocks. And the most interesting thing to me that stood out was that they very specifically in this document spelled out that they do not design Age of Sigmar with the intent that both players have an equal amount of time. Now, that's not their exact wording. I'm not reading it from their document, but they very clearly say we do not intend for both players to have an equal amount of time. That's not factored in. My gut reaction to this when I first read that was like, that's fucking insane. Like, I cannot believe that that would be the stance from a game company. And before I get into like my more nuanced thought, Aman, I'm sure you were also aware of this probably before I even brought it up. What was your kind of gut response to this before we dig in?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think initially I reacted very similar to you did, where I was just like, well, that doesn't make sense at all, right? It's a one-on-one game. You would expect
Cray
for both
cray.
people to
Yeah.
have the same amount of time. But then I started thinking about it a little bit, and I started reflecting on my experiences, and there's a part of me that feels like different factions or armies in Age of Sigmar, or kill teams or strike teams or units, regardless of the game system you're playing, might have or require more nuance. They might just be by design take longer. For example, if I'm playing Space Marines, right, and I guess I'm trying to think of a Horde example, War Machine Hordes example here for you because you're not too familiar with 40k. Like, okay, if I'm playing Menok and you're playing, what was the one, the Lizard faction you really liked, the
A Legion of Everblight.
that one.
Yeah.
So I feel like Legion of Everblight maybe had more monsters, and they were kind of maybe less units to activate, whereas like Menoth was just like a ton of zealots throwing bombs. Like those took forever.
Waves and waves of dudes and lots of small attacks. You're absolutely right.
So in those games, I feel like though in War Machine Hordes we used chess clocks, and I played very briefly, but I felt like when I would play Menoth, I would have to like rush through my turns because there was just so much to do, right? And so sometimes I feel like the design philosophy is, well, if you're playing a horde warband or a larger team or whatever that's more technical or mechanical, it might just soak up more time.
Yeah. Like that is certainly a reality. I do have some interesting anecdotes from War Machine, but I'm kind of curious with your Underworlds. I don't know that much about Warhammer Underworlds. How do you think it impacts a game like that? Is that something where you feel like the time is pretty equal, or are there also factions or builds where like that definitely takes way more time to play, or that definitely takes way more time to play against?
100%. And it's really fascinating you mentioned Underworlds just because they announced the new edition today and they kind of streamlined a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But if we look at the edition of Warhammer Underworlds that's currently live, I think when I look back to the games I've played, I think time is a huge factor because I think part of the skill of being a great Underworlds player is making the right decisions, anticipating what your opponent's going to do, but doing it all that quickly. Because back in the day, Underworlds used to be best 2 out of 3, and each game is 30 minutes. You have 90 minutes for the whole round, right? So you got to fly through your turns. They've extended it now to 45, but I think the point remains in that. And it's one of the reasons why I like playing elite factions, right? So in Underworlds, and we're not going to make this Underworlds conversation, but just very high level, I like playing factions or war bands, what they're called, that have 3 to 4 fighters. The max I ever really played competitively was 5. And the whole idea was I have less decision points. I can focus more on, like, I can rely on stats and I can just play my game. But a lot of people like playing like the larger war bands, right? Like ghosts and goblins who have like 7 to 9 miniatures. And I feel like those decision points and those play styles that those war bands lend to just takes longer, right? And so
Yeah.
because there was no mechanism to track time, I would just try to play my turns as fast as possible, knowing that my opponent's probably going to soak up more time than me. But when it is my turn, I can capitalize on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I think time management in general is something that I've thought a lot about over the course. I'm realizing now I've been playing miniatures games for like 15, 16 years or something. And uh, in the early days of Star Wars minis, I was very adamantly against chess clocks. And I remember our first regionals kind of made me check some of my thoughts because first round of this like 6 round regional, and I'm like, I want to do well. We have the largest regional in the world. I want to do well in this. And the first game, I could feel it going to time. I knew we had been playing for a long time. And I definitely had a slightly younger opponent who was still very good. Very, very good. Because he was one of the locals. We played all the time. Great player. But I was feeling like if I didn't get another turn, then I was just going to lose. And I kind of rushed him a little bit, and he responded to it and rushed, and then I got one more turn and ended up barely winning that game. And when I think back on it, I'm like, I don't remember who took more time. I just remember that time was a factor, and I don't know if I would have actually won that regional. I might have lost round one if it had been a different timer situation. Um, and so now over the years playing War Machine, right, that was a game that actually like embraced chess clocks and was very normal for all the tournaments and embraced by the company and supported. Um, so but clearly in that, spent a lot of the time playing, as you described, kind of like what your Warband's experience was like with Underworlds, where you would play less things and you were making more precise surgical plays that were more dependable and had a little less decision points. Now, mind you, if you mess up any one of those decision points, it can kind of screw you,
For
but you
sure.
made more dependable plays. And but when the game shifted, I definitely played a team that was like, I'm going to swarm you, you attack my stuff, they make more stuff, and you're going to run out of time trying to chew through my army fat. Like, even though I'm running lots of stuff, it's just going to be complicated for you. And I definitely won a lot of tournaments on time where my opponents just ran out of time trying to kill my stuff. And so it was absolutely a factor. Um, so I will definitely say that, like you, after I thought about this a little bit more, I definitely backed off a little bit. I was like, wait a minute, maybe this is not as crazy of a thought overall. Like, how much does any one of these companies think about the balance of time between one thing or another. What has been your experience? I know you've been a gamer now for a very long time. You've talked with varieties of playtesters. Have you ever had an instance where someone was like, "Oh, we changed this because it would adversely affect either the player or the opponent in some sort of timed situation"? Has that ever come up for you?
Yeah, I mean it has. I certainly there. I remember there was an Underworlds card where like technically, rules as written could create an endless loop, and you could technically like time out the game that way. And
Hmm.
so I think I
Probably
remember
not
that.
good.
No, not good at all, right? So I know that that was certainly removed. I don't think I've ever been in a live tournament situation where something was ruled because of the way that time was working out. But it's such a hard conversation to have, and I don't necessarily want to change the topic just yet. But to answer your question, not I haven't really seen anything like that in the games that we played together, like MCP or Shatterpoint.
Yeah. So I did just before we recorded this, I reached out to now I apologize. I always get developer versus designer for these wargame companies confused as to which means which. Are you able to correct me and
Yeah,
be like,
yeah. So a
okay, do
designer
it.
will come up with the design, right? So, for example, if we are talking about Star Wars Shatterpoint, someone who's a designer will come up with the rules for Lord Maul. So that's kind of like a Will Shick. And
Yeah,
then a developer is like a Will Pagani, who will say, okay, you've created these rules. Now I have to make sure that they not only function correctly in the realm of Shatterpoint, the limitations and parameters we've set. I have to make sure that they're legible, they're readable, they make sense, and also they don't break the game.
perfect. So I messaged David Carl, or commonly referred to as DC. He was, for listeners, if you're not aware of who this is, DC was one of the top players in War Machine in Mark 1. He went on to work for Privateer Press as, I believe, the lead developer. I do believe he did design some things. Like, I'm pretty sure the design for Convergence was largely him, but he was the lead developer for War Machine through a good chunk of Mark 1 and I believe like all of Mark 2 basically. And so I asked him, I was like, War Machine is a game that embraced chess clocks. How much did chess clocks actually come up in development conversation? And he told me that in Mark 1, it basically never came up. Now, that was before the full embrace of chess clocks. There were some starting to integrate timers, like kitchen timers, where you would have to manage like how much time you got per turn, that sort of thing. He did say that in Mark II, it did come up occasionally where there would just be things where it's like, oh, this is just so slow. It is actually going to hurt people on time, where they're going to have trouble activating this unit with the way that we designed it and developed it, and would make that sort of argument to get things changed from a timer perspective. And to be honest, I was actually a little surprised at the answer. I was half expecting to be like, no, it never came up. But it did at least come up a little bit. And I would say that War Machine is probably the game that embraced chess clocks the most. I never played
Yeah.
Guild Ball, but maybe they did as well. Um, does that surprise you? You played a little bit of War Machine. Um, does that answer surprise you at all?
No, I don't think it does. And keep in mind, like the War Machine that I played, I walked into Asgard Games, which was run by Pagani at the time,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Hey, this game looks cool," and I immediately got my butt kicked around with chess clocks, and I learned the hard way very quickly, right, on how to play the game. And so for me, it just made total sense because that's how I was inducted into the game.
Yeah.
But coming from a Games Workshop background, I was a little surprised at first because they don't ever play with chess clocks, right?
Yeah.
It's just not a thing.
I will say I also messaged Jeff Olsen, who was the developer after Pagani left Privateer Press. So he was
Mm,
a very common playtester while Pagani was the lead developer. And so I asked him the same question. And he said it really didn't come up. Now, he didn't develop as long as DC did, before moving on, but he said it really didn't come up very often. There was a few cases again where it came up, and he remembered situations where Pagani had argued this needs to change because it just slows down the game too much, and it doesn't, not just from the perspective of it being slow, but how it actually impacted a timed game. But Jeff's overall take was like War Machine was not developed with equal time in mind. That there were absolutely things that took longer to play, and there were things that took less time to play. And that was a built in aspect of the game. And even though there was clocks, there was never like, oh, this faction should play, should be able to get the job done in the same amount of time. No, that is just not a thing.
I I completely agree with that though, because like it also limits the design perspective, right? Like if you, let's say, have a arbitrary, and let's just use easy times here, that each
Yeah.
turn needs to take 30 seconds or a minute, right? Hypothetically. If that means that every single thing that you design that takes longer than a minute you invalidate, that might end up to be a very boring or repetitive game, right?
Yes.
And so I completely agree with the concept of it. And it's just so interesting because, we talk about War Machine a lot, and I get that that was like, play like you had a pair and all that, and you had to be super competitive.
Oh
and the
God,
chess
why do you
talk.
have to bring up that part of our past, Aman?
But at the same time, like, what I think a lot of people maybe don't realize, and it's not actually not a lot of people, but it's a lot of the people who like to play organized events, is that a lot of these games, while they support organized play, they're not created to be tournament games, right? We, as players, want to make them tournament games because we like them.
True. Yes.
But this is supposed to be a game that you just play casually. Or if you want to play in an event, great, there's parameters and rules. But like, look at Star Wars Shatterpoint, right? You have a time period, and then it hits mission critical, and then there's a random die rolled that only the TO rolls, and then adds anywhere between 1 to 6 minutes, right? Like, from a competitive standpoint, it's not very competitive, but I guess we make it competitive, right?
Well, using Will Schick's words, it's co-opetitive.
There you go.
So I will say that reading the document made me step back and go, wait a second. The reality is probably none of these games are actually truly designed that both players get an equal amount of time.
Yeah.
And I would love, like, obviously we don't have the main Age of Sigmar organized play guy to be like, so if two people are playing a mirror match, do you think they should have equal time? Right? Because maybe that's a different question. Like if they're playing the exact same thing, or are there other factors? And we could take it to Shatterpoint, right? Where I'm not sure Empire versus Republic versus Rebels versus Scoundrels or whatever. I'm not sure I instinctively go, oh, this is harder to play or takes longer. But I feel like each individual game, it's a little bit different. Where like maybe we're playing and you just get the perfect order deck, right? And you
Yeah.
don't have to think that much about it. Whereas I'm like struggling and I'm getting a flip and I'm like, fuck, do I reserve right now where like two of these cards are not good for me and two of them are great for me? Like, and I have to debate that reserve call, right? Like there's those sort of things that don't get distributed equally where one player may need more time to think it through. Do you think that that's a reality of Shatterpoint? And if you want to share something on MCP, that is fine too. But do you think it's actually we should expect that there will most often be kind of an imbalance between which side needs more time?
Yeah, 100%. I think it comes down to list selection a lot. Like, for example, I like to play Mando Mal a lot, right? That
Who
list.
doesn't?
Exactly. So that list inherently doesn't have too much synergy. The only other unit that moves another unit, depending on how you build the list, is DTE, Death Trooper Escort, moving either the
Yeah.
Dark Troopers or Fifth Brother, right? Now, conversely, let's say I bring that into someone who's playing all Empire or all Rebels or all Republic or all Separatists, and every single one of their characters has a tactic ability that moves another character, right?
Yes.
They're just going to take longer because they have more steps, more hoops they have to jump through, but also it's more decision points, right? And it goes back to the Underworlds conversation I had earlier, where I try to limit my decision points, but also I do feel like Shatterpoint's moving in a direction now where you're heavily incentivized to lean into your faction synergies, right? But I do think there is an imbalance, and a lot of that. Also, let's say this. Let's say it's a mirror, Empire versus Empire, same exact primary, secondary supports. Order deck, you mentioned, huge. Also, if you win Struggle 1, and I am trying to win Struggle 2 to just have a chance at winning the game, I might take longer than you because I have to. Otherwise, you just win, right?
Yes.
And so it's so interesting because there's so much nuance and there's so much hypotheticals that have to take place. But like in theory, like even if you're using chess clocks and a game is over and you look at how much time each player has left, they use different amounts of time. Right?
Yeah.
Just because you didn't run out of time doesn't mean you use the same amount of time.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, I've been pro chess clock for a long time now. Once I switched over to that in War Machine, I've been kind of all in on it. I played MCP that way. I did try to learn some lessons from War Machine's mistakes, factoring into how we did clocks like at LVO for MCP. And I am enjoying Shatterpoint without chess clocks. There is something fun about just like not having to worry about another thing. But you still have some weird end of game stuff, and like even came up right at the GT in Arizona and such. But up until this thing came up with Age of Sigmar, I was very much in the like everyone should have equal time, 100%, like no question. And I'm still not sure I'm opposed to chess clocks. Like if suddenly there was like a world championship of Shatterpoint and you and I were going to play, my gut would still say the most fair thing for us to do would be like, let's play this on a chess clock and we both get 50 minutes or whatever, right? I still, like, my gut says I would rather play in that situation than anything else, regardless of what I'm choosing to play. But I am a little more open now to maybe it is not actually the most fair thing. Like, does it actually disincentivize certain things? Does it actually punish the person that maybe is having a little worse luck with their order deck or with rolls and now suddenly needs to tank more? It's my eyes are open a little bit, is what I'm saying. For someone who started this off being like, fuck that.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that my eyes are certainly just as open as yours in the sense that like I understand it, right? And another thing that we don't talk about enough is that most people who play these games aren't going to be like you and me. They're not traveling the cons and they're not trying to like be super competitive, right? A lot of these gamers out there, the mass majority of people who are funding these game companies are just trying to have a good time, right? And so for them, it might not really matter. And I understand why a game company would say we don't want to support chess clocks because most people that they are purchasing their product aren't using it. But yeah, it's interesting, man, because again, like there's so much nuance, but do I ultimately think like the best way I can think about it is either give the round ample amount of time to where
Yeah.
like there's just excess time and there might be people waiting over or use chess clocks. Right? Like at
I
Worlds,
think I agree with you there.
right? Like at Worlds at Warhammer Underworlds, like my game should take no more than hour and a half or hour 45 max. But they gave us 3 hour rounds because they wanted every game system 4 hour rounds, excuse me. They wanted every game system to start their rounds at the same time.
Dude,
So
I thought
like
my rounds at LVO for the Invitational was crazy. You're getting like 4 rounds for a game that takes an hour and a half.
4 hours, yeah. So we all had no issues. People could
Yeah.
play as slow or as fast as they wanted. And even
It's
if you play a
interesting.
long game of Warhammer Underworlds, like you still have 2 hours left over, right? Because 40K and AOS take 4 hours to play, right? Those
Yeah.
games don't even finish in their time period, which is interesting. So yeah, I would say that I am less pro chess clock. Like I still am, but I understand.
Yeah. And I would still say that I am pro chess clock in general, but I haven't felt like it was super necessary for Shatterpoint. But so kind of as a closing thought here is would we actually want our war game to be designed with any sort of intent for across the vast majority of the field that things would take the exact same amount of time to play? And my first reaction is, now that I'm thinking about it, is no, I don't want that. There should
Yeah.
be, just like your fighting game, right? You know, your Mortal Kombat or whatever. You have some characters who are more simple to play, and you have characters that are more complex, take
Hmm.
more time to learn, and like have crazier moves and such. That's a natural part of it, and there should be things that are like, oh, this guy's a little bit more point click die, Vader 1, right? But then there's also these really complicated characters, you know, that are bouncing all over the place and doing a bunch of different little things, and power level is similar, but they are more complicated and a bit more time consuming, right? I would imagine that the average Mando activation is longer than the average Vader 1 activation. If we could
Yeah.
actually test that, I would say that is almost certainly the case. And I'm okay with that design in mind. So I don't think I would want the designers to change anything. Is that kind of where you land?
100%. I mean, look at Thrawn, right? Thrawn by
Yeah.
design is just going to take longer.
Yeah.
You can feel like you've had a whole turn with Thrawn and you haven't activated anyone yet.
You could feel like you've had multiple turns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, if you and I were to create a game from the ground up, scratch up right now, Charles, I completely agree with you. I would be like, I don't think we would design the game for both players to have equal time. We would try, but also part about playing this game is like the rule of cool, right? And if you're using like an IP source like Star Wars or Marvel, there's also being truthful to the character and their lore, right? But let's say we make a fresh IP, call it War Charles, you know, right? Or Omnis battles, and we play the game, and it's like, yeah, there's just no way, man. Like,
Let's be honest, it would be cyberpunk, and we would have these badass like Omnis and Amon characters with like
oh, that'd be cool.
trench coats and cybernetic arms and stuff. Like, it would be dope.
Yeah, yeah. As someone who has messed around with building their own game and have like a binder full of notes and Google Drive docs like filled with ideas, I think it would just limit the creative output that a game could create first and foremost. But also like it would also as a player, it would make you feel different, right? Like one of the cool things about maybe again the Legion of Everblight example versus Menoth is like they feel different to play. There's a very clear
Yes.
difference, right? And so that variety that maybe a lot of people like you and I, like we like playing games where you can swap teams around a lot because we get bored easily, right? And so and even in Shatterpoint, where every single team technically is laid out the same, 6 units,
Yeah.
there's still a difference between playing a Thrawn versus playing a Vader 1, right? Even though they're both Empire.
100%. Yeah. I will say, I just from the nature of these games needing to resolve in a certain amount of time, and I think we appreciate when we can get more games in a day. I
Yeah.
do wish that there was a little bit more design that went into cutting out the things that slow down the games too much.
Hmm.
And in like both MCP and Shatterpoint, I think MCP has these very slow scoring, not struggles, crisis cards, and I really wish that something would change there so that they didn't suck so bad. And on the Shatterpoint side, I feel like my longest games are almost always on Sabotage. Like Sabotage Struggle 1 can just drag on forever. And so
Forever.
I wish there was like most of the time in like other mission packs, I wish that like the priority system didn't kick in right away. Like I hate when someone scores 4 at the start of mission 3,
Oh, it's
or like
rough.
struggle 3. Like you're like, "Fuck, that should not be
Backbreaking.
a thing." But there's times in like Sabotage I'm like, "Can we have a priority system here where something scores 2 so we can break these ties and move this game on?" You know? So I do think there should be some, and maybe that's just from a mission struggle scenario, whatever you want to call it, should should promote keeping the game moving.
I agree. I mean, I think if there was ways in which we could find and game companies in particular could find ways to streamline things, I think that would be really exciting. The Sabotage Showdown example is a tough one because by nature, I think you could take a really tanky, grindy list, and that could be your game plan, right? Is to just bog your opponent down, win struggle one, and then they have a lot of pressure to win struggle two, and just to tie the game, right? Like that's an interesting concept that I don't think maybe people are. I don't think anyone's necessarily trying to win that way, but I think maybe one day there could be a list, right? I don't know. But it's so funny because, like, you made this example where I don't necessarily always like the fact that there's a priority objective, but the one mission where there isn't, because it's because there's the same amount of objectives, it like, oh, I wish there was a way to speed it up, right? Because when shifting first came out, it's like, oh man, it just whoever gets more wins, and like, yeah. But in
But
Sabotage,
I
it's like,
love playing shifting. I love every game on shifting pretty
yeah,
much. Um, but yeah, I do feel it in Sabotage. But
oh yeah,
I don't want to drag on about Sabotage. That's
of
not really
course,
the point of the
for
conversation.
sure.
Do you have any closing thoughts here before we kind of wrap up this discussion? Anything you didn't feel like got in the natural course of the convo?
The only thing I could think about adding is again to keep in mind that the ultimate purpose in all of this is to have a good time, right? And I think the conversation and the topic that Charles is bringing up today is because some people feel like when they don't have the same amount of time as their opponent, they can feel bad. But I would just say that if you're ever in a situation where you feel like your time is not being respected or it's being taken advantage of, just call in a judge, right? I think that maybe that's the one thing that we didn't talk about is there's ways to kind of speed things up that maybe aren't in the game, and it's through the event organizers. But outside of that, like, you know, I think we covered it all, man. Like it's just an organic way of gaming. Like even if we were to
Yeah.
play Monopoly, right? Eventually someone's going to take longer turns, and or even chess, right, which is like the perfect game, quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
Someone's going to take more time.
There is certainly a reason why clocks are called chess clocks, though. Um,
Yeah.
I wonder. Yeah, I mean, chess chess is yeah. I don't know enough about chess to even like make comments there, but I will say like my largest takeaway is that even I as a long-standing nerd have gut reactions to stuff. I find if I think about them more that gut reaction is probably more often wrong than it is
Yeah.
correct. And it's just weird to me how much I was like, fuck, no, that's so stupid. Like, why would you possibly say that you don't design your game for a fair balance of time between the players? And then the more I thought about it, I was like, wait a minute, why would you design a game that way? Like,
Yeah.
sure, like maybe as we saw from the anecdotes from like David Carl and Jeff, like, yeah, there's probably some things where you're like, this is just going to be too slow for competitive play. It's going to just make things too grindy and make it worse. And so you change it. But that doesn't mean that there's any real effort across any of the games that we play to make it so one team plays at a very, very similar pace as another. And so, yeah, it was weird. This was not the way I was expecting the conversation to go when I first started thinking about it. But as I thought about it more, yeah, we have a lot to learn still as nerds.
Oh, 100%. I think you made a very great point just at the end, Charles, to double down on that is, if your initial reaction to something is negative, take an hour or two, maybe even a day, sleep on it, and you'd be surprised how much that opinion might change, right? It might not,
Yeah.
but I think as a bunch of nerds who love, playing with plastic crack and all that and hyper fixating on tournament results and all this stuff and making content about it, I think it's also important to like take a step back and think, like, what is the purpose, right? And the purpose ultimately is to have fun and, play a cool game that's unique. And so whether it's War Machine or MCP or Shatterpoint or Underworlds or AOS, like pick your poison and just trust me, it's every different flavors of poison, right? There are problems in X game that AOS doesn't have and vice versa. So time is one of those things.
Mon, the only way I'm going to disagree with you is that the real point is so that we can get together and I can record with people who have great beards. That's the real point.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, actually, I
You're looking suave.
I did this myself. I faded it out a little bit.
Oh,
So I've yeah, I've been really enjoying the beards.
beard life. It's a good one. So,
It is.
well, watchers, make sure to go check out Hello There.
Oh, thank you.
And what was the name of your Underworlds podcast again?
Path to Glory.
Path to Glory. Yes. Pretty much you guys are like the podcast too for Underworlds.
Yeah, you know, I appreciate that. I think we're very lucky. We have a good group of guys, and we're all very passionate. And I think there's a new edition around the corner, and we're just super excited to see the game kind of have a resurgence again, for sure.
Yeah. And you definitely need another Underworld trophy next to that World Championship trophy up on your shelf. Like it's just lonely by itself, bro.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, World is right around the corner next month, so maybe
You got this.
you know,
It'll be fine.
I mean, I want to go back to back. Will I? We'll see. But I think
Yeah.
the most important thing is I'm just gonna have fun. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
all
what
you can do.
we try to do. All right, well, watchers, gonna close things out here. I'm so lucky to be able to talk with Aman, one of my favorite people, and of course, it's a YouTube show, so the most OP thing that you can do is like and subscribe or comment. I like comments, especially about Aman's beard. Later, nerds.